money, don't talk to me. I be over here. Music.
Okay, so we are now live. We've actually made it to episode 17 of Paranormal Addicts podcast. Our guest this week is Jim. Jim, do you just want to introduce yourself to everybody real fast, and then we'll dive into everything?
Sure. My name's Jim Conroy. I first visited Pennhurst in 1970, and I've been doing research on Pennhurst and places like it ever since then.
Okay, so like I said, we're going to get started with a couple of little short videos. I'm not the best at doing the split screen thing, so let's cross our fingers that this works this time.
American eugenicist Madison Grant publishes his controversial book, The Passing of the Great Race. In it, he advocates the idea of Nordic superiority and claims that the negative influence of inferior races on whites leads to moral decay and the eventual demise of American society.
Eugenicists, like most social theorists, embraced a concept of the ideal man as being white, of Anglo-Saxon and Protestant background, someone who is physically, socially, and morally fit to their way of thinking. Anyone who did not fit into that formula became somewhat suspect.
And second video, here we go.
Accounts that patients would get beaten if they didn't listen to staff members, if they didn't clean up that they were told to do. It could be a cut, it could be a laceration. There are accounts that patients would get beaten if they didn't listen to staff members, if they didn't clean up that they were told to do. It could be a cut, it could be a laceration, it could be a broken bone, and they would just send them off to the infirmary after the injury.
When patients misbehave, they're subjected to shock treatment or electroconvulsive therapy. If that doesn't work, a lobotomy is performed. A procedure severs nerve tracts in the frontal lobe of the brain. Even more horrifying is the asylum's final method of human control, sterilization.
Because they didn't want them to procreate what they thought was a scourge to begin with. So they figured at sterilization, they could re-enter society and not be a problem.
As the horrors inside Pennhurst continue, the larger eugenics movement spreads to Germany and becomes central to Nazi ideology.
Okay, so that's from the Haunted History little thing on Pennhurst, but it's important to understand. Pennhurst opened in 1908, and originally is the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded, and when it opened, it was actually like the therapies and stuff that they were using were actually considered to be, state of the art, at the time. It closed in 1987. That was after all the lawsuits came and uncovered the conditions. Supposedly children strapped to their cribs, locked in cages, patients naked and just sitting in their own waste. I mean, so so let's start out, Jim, if that's okay with you. Let's start out talking about the history of Pennhurst, not so much like the paranormal or stuff, but just the history of the asylum.
Sure, as you said, it opened in 1908, and its very purpose from the beginning was to take people with differences and set them apart from the rest of American society and keep them from having babies. So Pennhurst in 1908 received people right from the beginning, and it was overcrowded 2 years later. So many people in society wanted to get rid of people that they felt were different or inadequate in some way. That's the terrifying thing about these places is anybody might be sent there. A young woman who was pregnant without being married could be sent there. But it was intended for people who were in those days called feeble-minded. The term today is having an intellectual disability. Over the years, lots of people got into Pennhurst who never should have been there. But there were about 10,600 people who spent all or part of their lives there from 1908 to 1987. By the time I got there in 1970, it was a truly inhumane place to be. I really walked in as a 21-year-old guy just out of college, and I saw people in day rooms sitting in their own feces, mostly naked, screaming, banging their heads, sitting on benches, nothing to do all day long. It was just a terrible place, and there were hundreds of children there. In those days, there were nearly, about 3,000 people there. So it was exposed in 1968 on Philadelphia television by Bill Baldini, who remains interested in and involved to this day.
Yeah, he did, what was it, a 5-episode thing on the conditions of the Pennhurst, and I guess that's what really got the attention of everybody. But I mean, but like you said, the thing, I mentioned it too. The thing is, especially when it first opened, back in the early 1900s, the asylums. I mean, Pennhurst, was one of the biggest ones, especially in Pennsylvania. But I mean, we have them in other states and stuff, and that was pretty much used, like you said, as a place just to get rid of people that the society didn't feel belonged, and whether it be none of these terms, I guess, are politically correct anymore, but whether it be like a retarded kid, special educated, like you said, a unwed mother, the biggest asylum that I got here in Kentucky, I guess, is Waverly, and they just stuck anybody that had any condition that they didn't want to deal with, kind of like I guess in the New Testament, Old Testament times, kind of like they did with lepers. Just stick them somewhere so we didn't have to worry about them, and then that's when the overcrowding became an issue.
That's right. We have records of people who were driven there by their mom and dad in 1918, because I have a record of one young man who had one seizure, and they took him to Pennhurst thinking this is the right place, because back then that's what America believed. The right thing to do was a special school with special teachers, and where they'll be safe and they won't be bullied by their classmates out in regular society. We all used to believe that. And it sure turned sour. It turned into some of the worst things humans have ever done to each other.
But, with that in mind, like you said, that was the way that we thought, not necessarily ours, but that's the way society and even the medical experts at the time, they thought that was what was best for people. So, I think it's important that anytime somebody talks about Pennhurst or, Waverly or any of the asylums, it's important to put out there that, it wasn't created to be the nightmare that it turned out to be. It wasn't created for the torture of the patients. When it was created, they thought they were doing what was right.
That is true.
Due to like the overcrowding and just not knowing how to deal with those people, that's when the abuse and the neglect and that kind of stuff took place. At least in my opinion. Is that correct? Is that how you feel?
It sure is.
Okay.
Yeah, Ken. I think when we send people away, the rest of us kind of forget about them, and then we as taxpayers in American society in the 1900s, we didn't even know what was going on out there. So that happened, by the way, not just with people with intellectual disabilities, which we used to call mental retardation or feeble-mindedness. It happened not just for people with intellectual disabilities. It happened to other people who had mental illness, which is completely different. Everybody's heard of mental illnesses like psychosis, schizophrenia. It includes manic depression and depression, hallucinations, and so forth. Those were a whole separate set of psychiatric hospitals. These places, like Pennhurst, were called now we call them institutions for the intellectually disabled. And there's two completely separate systems in America. When I got into this mess in 1970, there were 293 places like Pennhurst in the United States. And they were all intended for people with what we used to call mental retardation. At the same time, there were 300 places for people with mental illness, and they were called psychiatric hospitals. Completely different. And the upshot of that difference was when America released people from the psychiatric hospitals, people with mental illness, they didn't build up any community supports for them. So people with mental illness were released from psychiatric hospitals. They wound up on the street. They didn't have a job. They didn't have a place to live. And they had pretty much lost contact with families. And that's why we have so many people with mental illness in our jails, our prisons, our nursing homes, and homeless. Different for the people from Pennhurst. When they were released in the 1980s, they had a place to go with 24-hour staff and something to do 5 days a week and everything they needed. So how many people left Pennhurst and wound up homeless? 0. We followed, in my Temple University study, we followed 1,156 people for 10 years. How many people were homeless? 0. How many people from Pennhurst wound up in prison? 0. Completely different experience, and a very happy experience, because those people who finally got out of Pennhurst in the 1980s were so much better off in every way we know how to measure it. It's one of the greatest victories of social change in the 20th century, really. So I think everybody listening should know that a lot of people suffered at Pennhurst, but a lot of people got out and got much better lives. So there's sort of a happy ending here.
And I think that's important to realize, because, we all hear the stories, you scroll through YouTube, whatever, and you see like the paranormal groups, Most Haunted Asylum, whatever. And, I'm sure there is. Let's be honest, that's why I have this podcast, is because of places like that. But it's good to know. It's good to know that there was a win at the end. The ones that, when the reform finally came, like you said, those thousands or whatever you follow, they all ended up in better places. Because like the point I made earlier, it ain't like the idea of Pennhurst wasn't to, punish people or to neglect them. It was to make a better life for them. And at the end, the ones that were there in the 80s, it was a win for them.
That is good to know. Everybody should know that. And yet, part of the belief in the paranormal activity at Pennhurst is that so many people suffered, and they did. Not everybody, though. At the end, there were people like Abraham Zlotnikov. He went into Pennhurst in 1915, and he lived there all his life. And he finally got out when he was 72 years old. And at first, he didn't want to go. But when he saw the new home he was going to go to in North Philadelphia, it was a 3-bedroom house on a regular street, and he said, well, okay, I'll try it. And Abe Zlotnikov lived in North Philadelphia in a small home, regular home with 24-hour staff. He had all the help he needed, and he had something to do 5 days a week. And his last 10 years of life, he lived 10 more years out there in the community. And he said to my friend, Greg Pierman, who worked at Pennhurst for 17 years, he said many times, how you doing, Greg? Well, how are you doing, Abe? I'm doing great. These have been the best years of my life being out here.
See, that's good to hear. So, we've talked about the when at the end, but let's talk more about the conditions that caused the abuse. I mean, looking back at the history and stuff, like I did, my favorite part of paranormal research, whatever, is I love the history of the locations I go to. So, no matter, so when I go to a place and I go in, it doesn't make, if I don't get paranormal, I'm okay with that because I still have a history, So, looking back at the history of Pennhurst, and I want to go on record as saying, and, anybody or any of our regular viewers, and especially Chris knows this already, Pennhurst is my bucket list location to go to. I've never been able to go to. I've never been to Pennhurst. I've been to a lot of locations. I've been doing this since I've been investigating the paranormal since 1992. So I've been to a lot of locations, but Pennhurst I haven't made it yet. I am going to make it in 2025 somehow, for sure. But anyway,
well, let me be there when you go.
Okay, we will make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about what led to the conditions. So, when it looks, the number one component, number one bad guy, if that's the way you want to look at it, to the abuse and all that stuff, to me, is the overcrowding. Once you get, I don't know how many people Pennhurst was actually designed for, but I've heard numbers that it had more than 2 times what its capacity actually was. So
yeah,
what it was supposed to be anyway. So once you have those kind of numbers, there's going to be not only abuse from the staff, but you're going to have abuse among the other patients, inmates, whatever term you want to use. So to me, is that accurate? Do you think the overcrowding was the number one issue with the led to the abuse and stuff?
Yeah, it's number one, and number two is that it was out of sight, out of mind. It was far away from the rest of us. Every time we do that,
Right.
we take human beings and we put them far away, and we overcrowd them every single time. It can be jails, psychiatric hospitals, intellectual disability facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, prisoner of war camps. Every one of them turns to abuse every time because they're isolated and they're overcrowded. They don't even have to be overcrowded to get abuse. I mean, in our prisoner of war camps in Iraq, our soldiers, good men and women, abused prisoners because they were far away and they were in a situation where power and control were the number one priority for the workers. The workers, facing being in a room with 40 or 50 people and 3 workers, what can you do? You go to work day after day and you try to help 40 or 50 people in a room, and there's just 3 workers. What can you do? They were so helpless. And that's what you said, overcrowding, underfunding. we, the rest of society, we didn't know what was going on out there. So we never went to the legislature and said, we will pay more taxes to take care of those people. We never did that because we didn't even know. It was hidden.
Yeah, we didn't. Like you said, out of sight, out of mind. And you were talking about like you were talking about 3 staff members to 30, 40 inmates, and and the inmates, were mentally disabled, the term we use now. That wasn't the term we used then. Then they were feeble-minded and retarded. But some of those people with that mental capacity, some of them were physically big people, and they don't necessarily have the right and wrong trigger that we have. So you have a staff member trying to treat this patient. This patient might think he's being assaulted somehow, so he starts fighting, and a lot of times the staff are just adapting to what they can, and the other thing is going back to the way that the medical people and the society looked at the treatment at that time. That nowadays we frown upon electric shock therapy and all that stuff, but that was considered state of the art back then. Nowadays we look at it as abuse, lobotomies, and electric shock therapy and all that, but that used to be medical science. At one point in the medical world, they thought that was the treatment for feeble-mindedness and all that stuff. Was so it is abuse, but it wasn't looked at as abuse back then.
When I go to Pennhurst for the past, I don't know, since it closed, I go there and sometimes I go at night and I sit in the basement of one of the buildings and I just, in the dark, and I just try to feel what people went through. And it wasn't their fault. They weren't vicious. They weren't mean. They weren't angry. They were being hurt, and it wasn't their fault. They were victims. And they're not scary. They're not trying to hurt us. They're not lingering spirits that are evil. Not at all. They were people who were sad and lonely and abused. And I want to tell you a story. You made a really good point about people feeling like staff were hurting them when they were trying to help them. That can happen. There's a young man named Nicholas Romeo who was sent to Pennhurst in about 1970.
Oh, that article is horrific.
Yep. And Nick was born in the Italian market downtown Philadelphia. And his dad was, a big, strong guy. And Nick, he never learned how to speak. And they wouldn't let him in public schools. They weren't allowed back then. One thing his dad did for him, because he didn't want him to be bullied, was he taught him to box. So Nick, here he was. He couldn't use language. He couldn't speak, but he could defend himself. Well, Nick's dad died one day, and Mom did not know what to do. All the psychologists and social workers said, send Nick Romeo to Pennhurst. So she did. And he was abused 48 times in 1 year. There were all these incident reports. And guess what he did? When somebody hit him, Nick knew how to box. And he became what they called the most dangerous man at Pennhurst. Why? Because he didn't feel safe. He was trying to keep himself alive, man. And he couldn't speak to explain what he was doing. He wound up in the hospital for 11 months, tied to a bed. Nick Romeo's case went to the Supreme Court of the United States. He was abused so badly. And he was abused so badly partly because he knew how to box. And he wasn't taking any of that crap. And that made him a danger. Isn't that sad? But he got out, like I said before, Nick got out. We didn't think, none of us thought Nick could ever make it in a small community home. And it took about a year for him to adapt, to become calm and to feel safe. But he spent 20 years in a beautiful home in Northeast Philadelphia, just like Abe. And I visited him there, and he came to conferences. couldn't speak, but he loved magic tricks, and I got to know him. Man, he had a wonderful life with two house parents who loved him, and he felt safe. That was it.
And you know that's what all the activity and everything comes down to in Pennhurst. You know, that should have been a safe place. You know, but it wasn't. And it was no fault of the patients, and not really other workers either, for the most part. I'm not
Right.
You know,
Good.
yeah. Exactly. And you know, really, really, as sad as Pennhurst is, if you really look at it, you know, from a step back and look at it, you know, it was really everybody, for the most part, was just doing the best they could in the situation that they were thrown into. And
Ken, so good. That's so right. Let's try to not encourage people to be angry at the staff, because they were people, mostly local people, and they got a job and they went to work every day, and it was hopeless. There was nothing they could do to make that place good, and it broke the hearts of so many people who worked there. And they tried and they tried and they tried, but oh my God, what can you do when there's 3 staff for 50 people?
exactly.
So it was overcrowding and underfunding. And if
Overcrowding,
you blame
underfunding.
anybody, you got to blame all of us, because we never looked into it. The rest of society, we didn't know about it. We didn't want to know. It's a little bit like the German population in World War II when the Germans tried to exterminate the Jews in all those camps. People living right next to the camps would always say, "We didn't know," and they didn't.
Right.
And Pennhurst was like that. All of us said we didn't know, and we didn't know until 1968. Bill Baldini brought those films into living rooms, and then America could no longer look away, and we had to do something. So I regard Baldini as the hero of the entire story.
Okay, so our friend Damien has said, you think the worker spirits wouldn't spend the rest of the time there hunting lives at work? Do you think this means they're going there unaware of our existence?
Well, I got a couple of theories. Let me say right out. I taught a course in parapsychology 50 years ago, and I've been interested in studying my whole life. But the upshot of all that study is I don't know anything. I just have theories. So I'm not sure any of us know anything for sure. But there were some staff who were really bad people. There's always going to be in any group of human beings, there's always going to be a few people who are bad. Most of those people who worked there went there out of love and they did their best. But there were some staff who were just plain rotten over all the years. But I'd say it's like 1 out of 50 who was really, really bad, like a sociopath, hurting people and everything. On the other hand, there were staff who were also in agony. What they had to see every day hurt their souls. And I think people went home every night, a lot of workers went home every night. They can't forget what they saw, and they're tremendously sad. Maybe they linger because of the sadness of the things they couldn't fix. But for the most part, I don't see a lot of evil. I just see a lot of pain and trouble.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. Like I've been doing this a long time, as we said earlier, and I consider myself a student in the field. I studied all. I took college courses and everything I could. Parapsychology, demonology, all that. So I'm a student of it. An intellectual, if that's the term you want to use. So the theory is, and I understand this is a parascience, a psychoscience, but it's still a science, the theory is like why we have ghost spirits, whatever term you want to use, why they're still here is, we have different kinds. We have the most common kind is I just went blank. is just a residual. Yeah, there we go. The most common spirit is just a residual haunting. The spirit's just doing what it always did. For whatever reason, they're attached to a location or whatever. So, an example of a residual haunting that I investigate often is we have a location here in Paducah, Kentucky, which is my hometown. Well, my team is based right there. It's called the Hotel Metropolitan. It was the African American hotel, during segregation and back when we thought that whites were better than blacks and all that stuff. But it was it was on the Chitlin Trail, and it had famous musicians, Negro League baseball players, the Harlem Globetrotters all stay there. So I mean, it was like the Knights Hotel for in Paducah. Duke Ellington stayed there. Ray Charles, Hank, Josh Gibson from the Negro, all these people. So anyway, one of the location is like known to be active. One of my friends, Damian Christie, who's from Tennessee, he actually considers it one of the top 3 most active locations he's ever been to. So the activity's there. But the most famous ghost, whatever term you want to use, is a residual that's just this lady. They assume it's the lady that owned it. And at 11:01, and I don't know why 11:01, but at 11:01 at night, she just walks down the staircase. That's all she does, just walks down the staircase. Doesn't walk back up, just walks down and disappears. So that's a residual. And then, you have your least common haunting, which is the one that, all your YouTubers like to scream about, is your demonic hauntings. I mean, I'm not good. There's demonic hauntings out there, but that's the minority. I mean, that's the 1% are demonic. And then you have, your intelligent hauntings and your, poltergeist hauntings and whatnot. So, what do you think, in your opinion, since Pennhurst is, your place? What do you think? What kind of hauntings do you think we have there? Do you think it's residual, or you think it's intelligent? What do you a mixture of? Just what kind of hauntings do you think we're dealing with there?
Well, I guess there's another theory of lingering, and that's unfinished business. I would say most of the people who lived in Pennhurst, I don't think they had unfinished business. So I got to go with residual mostly. And remember, about 55% of the people who lived at Pennhurst did not use verbal language. They could not speak, and they couldn't understand much either. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of, what am I doing here? What is the purpose of my life? Why are they doing this to me? People were confused and lost and lonely and often hurt. So I have to go with the best theory is just residual. This was my home. I don't know what's going on, and I don't know where to go next.
So, yeah, I did skip past unfinished business. I don't know why, because that's probably the second most common, or, at least that's how we try to categorize it. So, but, so talking about, like residual. So, a lot of the patients, I don't know the, percentage or not, but a lot of the patients at Pennhurst were children and minors. Is that true? I mean, so
yeah,
a theory that I've came up with over the years, and I'm not saying I'm an expert. I don't, but I'm at least experienced at it. So
Yeah.
we always discuss like why are spirits still here? Because obviously, spirits can actually go whenever they want to. So why do they stay here? So I theory that I've formed over my years of experience, and I've discussed it with other paranormal investigators that I trust and respect. When it comes to children, a lot of times the reason they don't cross over or go to the light or whatever is because they're not taught that. That's not something as a kid that you know about or you're taught. As adults, especially the older we get, like I'm probably closer to the end of my life than I am the beginning of my life. So I definitely, I definitely understand. Chris, I understand I understand the whole crossing over. I understand how it works. I learned it in church, and all that stuff. But kids, they feel that they have the rest of their life ahead of themselves, so they're not really concerned about crossing over, what that means. And and I think at places like Pennhurst, that's even more true because you have kids but you also have feeble-minded people whose mind are probably like kids. So I think a lot of times they don't cross over because they don't understand what the process, and sometimes they're scared, and sometimes they may be afraid of the light. They just don't, the whole situation. So example I got, I was doing a residential investigation at this location in Hickman, Kentucky, and so we get there, and one reason that this location always sticks in my mind is, a lot of times when you go into an investigation, it may be an hour, 2 hours, or whatever before you really get anything. We go into this place and and the spirit starts speaking with us immediately. I mean, and it's nothing bad, but we ended up finding out it was a teenager, and he actually communicated with us and told us that
Be right back.
he gave us his name. He told us he drowned, and he drowned with his stepdad and his mom. He specifically said stepdad and mom. So we was able to take the information he gave him. We was able to locate in the newspaper that a teenager by age 15, which is what this spirit told us his age was, a 15-year-old with his name drowned with his mom and his stepdad in 1890. And but yeah, that's what he ended up telling us, is that he watched his mom and his stepdad crossed over, but he was afraid of the light, so that's why he stayed there. So I mean that. What do you think about that theory? You think I'm onto something there, or you think I've just lost my mind?
Well, there's so many varieties. That's got to be believable. There's another one about there were people at Pennhurst and places like Pennhurst who were less capable, people who couldn't speak. And then there were people who were very capable. Places like Pennhurst operated because the capable people, unpaid, helped take care of the less capable people. So we used to call that higher functioning, by the way. It's kind of offensive terminology now, but people with more skills were forced, and many of them wanted to, help take care of the little ones, the people who needed a lot of help. Isn't it possible that some of those people really wanted to help the less capable people, and when they crossed over, they stuck around to keep helping the ones who didn't know where to go? Just one more theory, but I think that holds some water, because of all the hate and pain that was in that place, there were a lot of people who lived there who tried to help other people who lived there.
I think that's a good theory. So, going with that theory, here's a situation that I ran into that is the same thing. Like a spirit coming back to help protect the other spirits. So I was investigating this place. It's a little inn in Clay City, Kentucky. They always this one room, for some reason it's just one room, has had 4 verified deaths, murders in that one room. The last one, the body was never even found. But anyway, so they've always had activity, like the owners is a husband and wife owner, and the wife would always get like scratches on her when she'd go change the sheets or whatever, stuff like that. And the cameras would always go crazy, stuff like that. So the wife would never let the husband reach out to anybody to come check it out because she thought it would get a bad stigma to it, Well, they're selling it now. So they reached out to us, and we took the 5-hour trip across the state of Kentucky, and we get there. So we investigate. It's a long investigation. We break it down to 2 parts. We investigate from like 8 to midnight, and then we're told that the spirit's most active at 2 o'clock. So we take like a 2-hour power nap and get back up, and So anyway, long story short, what we end up finding out, is not the hotel, because the hotel didn't exist at the time, but the property that the hotel's on used to be where they sold kidnapped kids into slavery.
Oof.
And there was one spirit who was a little bit older. He was about 17, and he was a little mentally disabled, and he came back to protect the little kids. So that's kind of the same theory. Yeah, so there are some spirits that believe they're going to hell and to be judged, so they might fight the light. Very true. I have another story. I got lots of stories, I think, Jim. So another story, going there with along with what Jim Ray said, was so I was investigating. I got a phone call from the state police, and about these property owners kept complaining about seeing the victims from this wreck that had happened like 6 months ago. It was a fatal crash, but they kept seeing the girl, and they were teenagers, so they kept seeing the girl and the guy, even though they had passed. But the assistant, the chief deputy, is a friend of ours. So he's like, come see if you can find anything. So it took us. We had to actually go there like 2 or 3 times to finally get communication. We had to build the trust with the spirit and all that stuff. But like Wade said, what it ended up being, we made contact with the girlfriend, and she was still there because she couldn't find her boyfriend. And the boyfriend was still there because he was going to hell. And that's what he told us. He's like, tell her I can't go with her. I'm staying here because I'm going to hell. Tell her to go on. So Ray has a valid point there. I mean, if I thought I was going to hell, I'd probably stay here too. I think I'd want to stay and hunt a few people anyway. So let's talk about some of the locations there at Pennhurst that has the most activity. Like I was talking to Chris earlier about. Let me see if I can find it. About. The Mayflower building.
That's right.
Yeah, the Mayflower building. Yeah. So Chris said it was like the boys' dormitory, but is that one of the hot spots of Pennhurst? And why do you think it is?
Well, there were largely babies there in the later years of Pennhurst. So Mayflower Hall had like hundreds of babies, a lot of people in cribs. And as they grew, some of them who had major disabilities stayed in cribs till they were 20 years old. So lots of difficult lives there. And there was a book, of course, that came out called The Ghosts of Mayflower, which was about that very building. And the book was mostly about a little girl who is reported frequently on the upper floors of Mayflower Hall. Mayflower, though, is now the location of the museum, which began about 6 years ago with new owners. And it's one of the best museums on this kind of disability facility in the United States, in the world, actually. So Mayflower is a building.
I'm going to see it in 2025, Jim. I'm telling you, sometime next year, I'm coming.
And I'll be your tour guide. Right next door to Mayflower is Quaker Hall, and Quaker in after the 1940s, Quaker is where they put the people with the most challenging behaviors, like Nick Romeo, people who would fight back when they got ordered around, pushed around, touched, hurt, abused, hit. Uh, that's where the challenging behavior folks wound up. And so most people over my years have gone to Quaker Hall to look for activity. And so that's a big one. Right next to Mayflower.
So he said that there's a guy that wrestles named Fisher and a little girl named Emily that wanders around.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But like you said, I think it's important to know because a lot of these YouTubers, and I'm not going to give them any more. They've already had their 5 minutes of fame, in my opinion. So I'm not going to give them any. But a lot of these YouTubers and stuff, they try to make it out as like violently and all this stuff. I think it's important to understand, like you said, the spirits there, they're not malicious or anything. They're just there because they have a attachment to the location. You think
Good.
that's a fair
Well
statement?
said. Yeah. I think you're right there. And it brings me to one of my wishes. I wish that every year people who care and who are interested in paranormal could gather and have a ceremony to try to help people move on.
I think that would be awesome. I mean, that's one of the things. I get more joy. I don't know if that's the right, more closure, whatever term you want to use. When I'm somewhere and I'm able to help a spirit cross over. I believe spirits can cross over whenever they want to, but a lot of times they need the help, the guidance, whatever. So I love being able to be there to do that. A technique that I just recently started doing when I cross somebody over, or when I cleanse a house, anything that involves removing a spirit, I do is I take my REM pod and I set it by the door or by the windows, and that way as they're crossing over, I can see it. The lights go off or whatever. That way. So, but yes. So just let me ask you this question. Thanks to these YouTubers and a guy named Zach that we're not going to talk about and stuff like that. These people who like to go into locations and provoke the spirits and yell demons, all this stuff. Because of people like that now, a lot of times when you go to like historical places like Pennhurst or like Waverly Hills or Octagon, any of those places, a lot of times when you go to those places now, you have to sign a waiver, and sometimes those waivers say you're not supposed to cross over the spirits. How do you feel about that? I'll let you know how I feel about it, and then you can tell me how you feel about it. The way I feel about it, if a spirit's there and they want to cross over, that's my responsibility to help them cross over. We're not supposed to trap spirits in locations. So if a spirit comes to me and says, help me cross over, I'm not going to say, oh, I can't. I signed this piece of paper. To me, I just feel that that's like morally wrong. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely the same. I mean, you're not supposed to make money off of human misery. Period. And those are people
Exactly.
trying to get you to sign a form because the spirits in the place, that's their business. That's how they make money. And they want to keep them there. Oh my God, that's so awful. They should be trapped themselves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not going to. I'm obviously going to sign the form because I want to investigate the place. But I'm going to tell you, if a spirit comes to me and says I want to cross over, guess what? I'm helping them cross over.
I'm with you.
So, okay, there we go. So, I hope Chris gets back because we're almost out of time. But
Yeah.
So, tell people who want to go to Pennhurst, who do they contact to investigate? What's the how much does it cost? Is it public? Is it private investigations? Can they do a private investigation, or does it have to be a public investigation? Just give them a little bit of that information.
All right. The Pennhurst LLC is a company, a private company, that owns the grounds. My group doesn't. We're a nonprofit. We're devoted to remembering the people who lived and died there. So the company that owns Pennhurst runs paranormal investigations and the Halloween attraction and the historic tours every Saturday at 11 a.m. and tours of the museum. The paranormal and photographic tours are for money. And you can go in a group. You can pay to stay overnight. You can pay to take a tour. It's all at Pennhurstasylum.com. So that's where to go and find out how much it costs. The Halloween attraction runs about 50 to 70 bucks, depending on what you want to do. And I'm very, very happy to say that things have changed for the better at the haunted house. In the beginning, in 2009, the haunted attraction actually hired people to act as people who used to live there, to act like people with intellectual disability. That was horrible. That was just demeaning and degrading and insulting. Terrible. That's all gone now. Now, the haunted attraction is a place where you take a date and you get the shit scared out of you. It's wonderful. It's a lot of fun. There's monsters and vampires and mummies and things popping out of the walls. Great. But they're not insulting the memory of the people who lived and died there. Great. So I think the haunted attraction is one of the best in America. It's really great. And on top of that, I really admire the owners because they're also teaching the history. And you can get a history tour for about 40 bucks, I think. Saturday mornings every week.
And of course, they always have the Paracon every year at Pennhurst, and Get Haunted is always part of that. I actually wanted to go this year, but I missed it. But I'm going next year.
All right.
I want to do an investigation too. So we are actually out of time. Chris didn't make it back. So thank you for being on the show, Jim.
It's been a pleasure.
I look forward to meeting you in person when I make it to Pennhurst. So we will talk then. Thank you, sir.
I will see you next year. Good day. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Okay, for the people out there, Get Haunted Get Haunted always has plenty of events, but the next big event is in October. So here's a little video for anybody that's interested.
Welcome to the night where the paranormal unite.
Chris left again. All right, so Jim, again, thank you. And I'll look forward to seeing you next year. And for everybody out there, make sure you tune in next week. We have leaders, Get Haunted leaders, Rob and Sarah is going to be with us. So that should be a good episode. We will see everybody next week.